My daughter said, let us know when you're better, so I didn't let them know. When I changed the will, the chest pain started on a Tuesday morning while I was reading the newspaper at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd eaten breakfast every day for the past 32 years. It began as a dull ache, the kind you might dismiss as heartburn or the result of sleeping wrong. But within minutes, it had grown into something that felt like an elephant sitting on my ribcage. I set down the paper with shaking hands, watching the headlines blur as sweat beaded on my forehead. At 73 years old, I'd been fortunate enough to avoid any major health scares. But I wasn't naive. This felt different from anything I'd experienced before, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to call for help. My first thought wasn't of calling 911. It was of calling Jennifer, my eldest daughter, the successful lawyer who lived 20 minutes away in the affluent suburb where she'd moved after her divorce settlement came through. Jennifer, who used to crawl into my lap as a little girl and beg me to read her the same bedtime story 3 times in a row. Jennifer, who had called me her hero until she turned 16 and decided I was an embarrassment instead. With trembling fingers, I dialed her number, each ring feeling like an eternity as the pain in my chest intensified. Dad. Her voice was crisp, professional. The tone she used in court rather than the one she'd once used to tell me about her day at school. Is everything okay? It's kind of early for a social call. Jenny, I said, using the nickname she'd outgrown sometime in high school, I think I'm having a heart attack. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. Then Jennifer's voice came back, but it had shifted into something that sounded like mild annoyance rather than concern. Dad, are you sure? Sometimes anxiety can feel like chest pain. Have you been watching too much news again? You know how those political shows get you worked up. I pressed my free hand against my chest, feeling my heart hammering against my palm in an irregular rhythm that definitely wasn't anxiety. Jenny, I think I need to go to the hospital. Could you? Dad, I'm literally walking into a deposition right now. This case has been 2 years in the making, and there are millions of dollars at stake. If you really think it's serious, you should call 911. Call 911. She was telling her father, who might be having a heart attack, to call strangers instead of asking her own daughter for help. I just thought maybe you could meet me at the hospital. Or look, I'll try to check on you later, if this thing wraps up early, okay? But Dad, you've had false alarms before. Remember last year when you thought you were having a stroke because your arm went numb, and it turned out you'd just slept on it wrong? That had been different. That had been a moment of panic over something that resolved itself in minutes. This was sustained, growing worse, and accompanied by a sense of impending doom that I'd never experienced before. This isn't like that, Jenny. Something is really wrong. Okay. Call Dr. Morrison's office and see if he can fit you in today. If he thinks it's serious, he'll send you to the emergency room. I really have to go now. There are 12 people waiting for me in a conference room. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting at my kitchen table with the phone in my hand and the crushing realization that my chest pain might not be the worst thing happening to me that morning. I tried my son Michael next. Michael, who was 3 years younger than Jennifer but somehow seemed decades older in terms of responsibility. Michael, who ran his own construction company and had always been the practical one, the problem solver, the child who still called me on Father's Day and remembered my birthday without prompting from his wife. Dad. Michael's voice was warm but distracted, and I could hear machinery running in the background. Hey, what's going on? Mike, I'm having some chest pain. Pretty bad chest pain. I think I might need to go to the emergency room. Shit, Dad. Are you okay? The concern in his voice was immediate and genuine, and for a moment I felt a flood of relief. How bad is it? On a scale of 1 to 10, 7, maybe 8? It's been going on for about 20 minutes now, and it's getting worse. Okay, listen to me. Call 911 right now. Don't drive yourself. Don't wait to see if it gets better. I'll meet you at St. Mary's. That's where they'll take you, right? Finally, someone was taking this seriously. Someone was treating me like a person whose life mattered, whose emergency deserved an immediate response. Yeah, that's the closest hospital. Mike, thank you. I was starting to think, don't think about anything except getting help right now. Call 911 and I'll be there as soon as I can. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. The EMTs were professional and efficient, asking questions about my symptoms while they attached monitors and started an IV in the back of their truck. By the time we pulled into the emergency room, I was hooked up to more machines than I'd ever seen outside of a science fiction movie. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of tests, consultations, and waiting rooms. Blood work, EKGs, chest x-rays, a stress test that had to be stopped when my heart rate spiked dangerously high. Through it all, Michael sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside my hospital bed, making phone calls to reschedule jobs and reassure his wife that he'd be home eventually. The good news, Dr. Patel told us, when she finally returned with my test results, is that you didn't have a heart attack. The bad news is that your stress test shows significant blockages in 2 of your main coronary arteries. Mr. Richardson, you need bypass surgery, and you need it soon. Bypass surgery, open heart surgery, the kind of major medical procedure that changes your life permanently, that requires months of recovery and fundamentally alters your relationship with your own mortality. How soon are we talking? Michael asked, leaning forward in his chair. Within the next 2 weeks, ideally. These blockages are severe enough that another cardiac event is almost inevitable without intervention. We're looking at a double bypass, minimum, possibly triple depending on what we find during the surgery. I felt the room spinning slightly as the reality of my situation sank in. At 73, major surgery carried risks that younger patients didn't face. There was a real possibility that I might not survive the procedure, or that I might survive it but never fully recover. Dad. Michael's voice seemed to be coming from very far away. Dad, are you okay? I need to call Jennifer, I said. She needs to know what's happening. Michael helped me dial her number from the hospital bed phone, and I listened to it ring 4 times before going to voicemail. Her professional recording, the same one she'd used for the past 5 years. You've reached Jennifer Richardson Walsh. Please leave a detailed message, and I'll return your call within 24 hours. Jenny, it's Dad. I'm at St. Mary's Hospital. It wasn't a false alarm. I need bypass surgery within the next 2 weeks. Please call me when you get this. She didn't call back that day, or the next day, or the day after that. Michael, meanwhile, rearranged his entire work schedule to drive me to preoperative appointments, help me understand the mountain of paperwork the hospital required, and research the best cardiac surgeons in our area. He took time off work he couldn't afford to lose, canceled a family vacation that had been planned for months, and never once complained about the disruption to his life. Has Jennifer called you back yet? He asked on Thursday, 4 days after my diagnosis, as we sat in Dr. Kumar's office discussing surgical options. No, I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. She's probably busy with that big case she mentioned. Michael's jaw tightened. Dad, she knows you're having heart surgery. What could possibly be more important than that? I didn't have an answer for him, because I was asking myself the same question. What kind of case? What kind of professional obligation? What kind of anything could be so important that you couldn't return a phone call from your father who was facing life-threatening surgery? That evening, I tried calling Jennifer one more time. This time she answered, but I could hear restaurant noise in the background, laughter, clinking glasses, the sounds of people having a good time. Dad, hi. Sorry, I haven't called back. It's been absolutely crazy here. What was that message about the hospital? Jenny, I'm having open heart surgery next Friday. Double bypass, possibly triple. The doctor says it's urgent. Oh. There was a pause, and I could hear her saying something to someone else, her hand partially covering the phone. Dad, I'm actually at dinner with some clients right now. This is really important for the firm. My heart surgery is next Friday. Jenny, right? Yes. I heard you. Look, is Michael handling all the details? Because you know how I get around hospitals and medical stuff. I'm just not good with that kind of thing. Not good with that kind of thing. Her father's major surgery was something she wasn't good with, like parallel parking or assembling furniture. I just thought you'd want to know, I said quietly. Of course I want to know. I'm glad you're getting the help you need. Listen, let us know when you're better. Okay, I'll try to visit once you're home and recovered. Let us know when you're better. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not I'll be there for the surgery. Not I'll visit you in the hospital. Not what can I do to help. Just let us know when you're better. Like I was calling in sick to work rather than facing the most serious medical crisis of my life. Jenny, Dad, I really need to get back to dinner. These clients are flying back to New York tomorrow, and this deal could set up the firm for the next 5 years. You understand, right? She hung up before I could answer, leaving me sitting in my living room with the phone in my hand and the echo of those words ringing in my ears. Let us know when you're better. I looked around the house where I'd raised 2 children, where I'd taught them to ride bikes and helped them with homework and celebrated every birthday and graduation and achievement they'd ever had. The walls were covered with photos of family vacations, school events, Christmas mornings, soccer games, dance recitals, a lifetime of memories that apparently meant more to me than they did to the people in the pictures. Jennifer had been the academic achiever, the one who'd graduated summa cum laude from law school and built a successful practice representing corporate clients. Michael had been the athlete, the one who'd played college football and channeled his competitive drive into building a thriving business. I'd been proud of both of them, had sacrificed to pay for their educations, had supported their dreams even when those dreams took them far from the blue-collar life I'd known. But somewhere along the way, Jennifer had decided that her success made her too important for the mundane concerns of family obligations. Somewhere along the way, she'd started seeing my needs as inconveniences rather than opportunities to show love. Michael arrived at my house an hour later with Chinese takeout and a folder full of information he'd printed about bypass surgery recovery. He'd researched physical therapy options, looked into meal delivery services for my first few weeks at home, and even called my insurance company to understand what would and wouldn't be covered. Jennifer's not coming to the surgery, is she? He said, settling into the armchair that had been his mother's favorite spot before cancer took her 5 years ago. She's busy with work, I said, not meeting his eyes. Dad, you're having open heart surgery. She can't be too busy for that. Apparently she can. Michael was quiet for a long time, methodically eating his lo mein while I picked at my sweet and sour chicken. Finally, he set down his fork and looked at me. Dad, I need to ask you something, And I want you to be honest with me. When you and Mom wrote your wills, how did you divide things between Jennifer and me?" The question caught me off guard. Why would you ask something like that? Because I'm starting to think Jennifer sees you as a bank account rather than a father. And if that's true, if she's only interested in what she's going to inherit someday, then maybe it's time to reconsider how your assets are distributed. I'd never talked to either of my children about my will, partly because I'd hoped I wouldn't need to think about it for many more years, and partly because the conversation felt morbid. But Michael's question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding: the reality that my relationship with Jennifer had become transactional somewhere along the way. "Your mother and I split everything equally," I said finally. 50-50 between you and Jennifer. The house, the life insurance, the retirement accounts, everything. And Jennifer knows this. We told both of you when we updated the will after your mother died. We wanted you to know that everything was fair, that neither of you would have to fight over anything." Michael nodded slowly. "So Jennifer knows she's getting half of everything, which means she doesn't have to worry about maintaining a relationship with you to secure her inheritance. She can treat you however she wants because she knows the money will be there regardless." The truth of what he was saying settled over me like a cold weight. Jennifer's indifference wasn't just about being busy or uncomfortable around medical situations. It was about taking her inheritance for granted, assuming that her place in my will was secure, regardless of how she treated me. "I never thought about it that way," I said. "Maybe it's time you did," Michael replied quietly. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Jennifer's words. "Let us know when you're better," as if my recovery was something that would happen to her convenience, something she could check off a list when it was complete. I thought about Michael, who had dropped everything to help me navigate the most frightening medical crisis of my life. Michael, who had sacrificed time and money and peace of mind to make sure I wasn't facing this alone. I thought about the will sitting in my safe, the document that would determine how the fruits of my life's work were distributed after I was gone, a document that reflected my love for both children equally, regardless of how that love had been returned. And I started to wonder if it was time for that document to reflect reality instead of hope. Surgery was scheduled for the following Friday. 6 days to get my affairs in order, 6 days to prepare for the possibility that I might not wake up from anesthesia, 6 days to decide what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind, 6 days to figure out whether a father's love should be unconditional, even when it wasn't returned. The pre-operative appointment on Monday morning was a sobering reminder of what lay ahead. Kumar walked me through the surgical procedure in detail, showing me diagrams of how they would crack open my chest, stop my heart, and reroute blood flow around the blocked arteries that were threatening my life. "The surgery will take approximately 4 to 6 hours, he explained, his calm professionalism somehow making the terrifying sound routine. "Recovery in the ICU will be at least 48 hours, then another 3 to 5 days in a regular room before you can go home. Full recovery takes 8 to 12 weeks. Michael took notes throughout the appointment, asking practical questions about pain management, physical therapy, and what kind of help I'd need during the recovery period. He'd already arranged to take a leave of absence from his construction company, something that would cost him thousands of dollars in lost contracts, but which he'd done without hesitation. "What about family notification?" Dr. Kumar asked. "Who should we call with updates during the surgery?" "Michael will be my primary contact," I said. "He's listed as my emergency contact and medical power of attorney." "What about other family members?" "Sometimes it helps to have multiple people we can reach out to." I glanced at Michael, who was studying his notepad with careful attention. "My daughter Jennifer is if she's very busy with work. Michael can update her if necessary." Dr. Kumar nodded, but I caught the slight frown that crossed his features. In 30 years of performing cardiac surgery, he'd probably seen every variation of family dynamics, and he likely recognized the telltale signs of a family fractured by neglect and misplaced priorities. After the appointment, Michael and I went to lunch at the diner where I'd taken him and Jennifer for pancakes every Saturday morning when they were kids. The place hadn't changed much. Same red vinyl booths, same checkerboard floors, same handwritten menu that had been laminated so many times, it looked like it was sealed in plastic. "Dad," Michael said, as we waited for our food, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer." "What is it?" "If something goes wrong during the surgery, if there are complications, do you want me to call Jennifer?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us wanted to voice. If something goes wrong, if there are complications, if I die on that operating table, do you want my daughter there to say goodbye? "I don't know," I said honestly. "Part of me thinks she should be there because she's my daughter, because that's what family does. But another part of me wonders what the point would be. She's made it clear that my medical situation is an inconvenience to her. Why would my death be any different?" "Maybe because death is permanent," Michael said quietly. "Maybe because she'd regret not being there for the rest of her life. Or maybe she'd be relieved that she doesn't have to pretend to care anymore." The words came out more bitter than I'd intended, but they reflected a truth I'd been struggling with since Jennifer's phone call. How do you maintain love for someone who treats that love as a burden? How do you keep hoping for a relationship with someone who has made it clear that you're not a priority in their life? Our food arrived, and we ate in contemplative silence for a while. Finally, Michael set down his burger and looked at me with the serious expression he'd worn as a child when he was working up the courage to ask for something important. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about your will being split 50-50 between Jennifer and me. What about it? I think you should change it." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Mike, hear me out, okay? I'm not saying this because I want more money for myself. Hell, give my half to charity if you want. But Dad, you've worked your entire life to build something to leave behind for your children. You scrimped and saved and made sacrifices so that Jennifer and I would be taken care of after you're gone. That inheritance represents decades of your love, your hard work, your hopes for our future. That's exactly why I want it split equally. You're both my children." "But we're not both acting like your children," Michael said, his voice getting more intense. "I'm here, Dad. I've been here through Mom's cancer, through your retirement, through every holiday and birthday and crisis for the past 5 years. Jennifer shows up when it's convenient and disappears when you need her. Most she's busy building her career." Bullshit. The profanity was so unlike Michael that it stopped me mid. "Dad, Jennifer makes more money in a month than most people make in a year. She has associates and paralegals and a whole team of people working under her. If she wanted to be here, she'd be here. The truth is, she doesn't want to be bothered." I stared at my son. This man who had grown up to be everything I'd hoped he would be: responsible, compassionate, loyal, the kind of person who drops everything to help others when they need it most. And I thought about Jennifer, brilliant and successful and cold, who saw family obligations as inconveniences to be managed rather than opportunities to show love. "What are you suggesting I do?" I asked. "I'm suggesting you make your will reflect reality instead of wishful thinking. I'm suggesting you leave your money to people who actually care about you, not just people who share your DNA." That afternoon, I made a phone call that would change everything. I called Robert Hendricks, the lawyer who had handled my affairs since before my children were born, who had drawn up my first will when Jennifer was in elementary school and Michael was still in diapers. "Robert, I need to make some changes to my will before my surgery on Friday." "Of course." "Edward, what kind of changes are we talking about?" "I want to change the beneficiary distribution. Instead of 50-50 between my children, I want everything to go to Michael." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Edward, that's a significant change. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Sometimes medical stress can affect our judgment about family relationships. This isn't about medical stress, Robert. This is about 43 years of being a father, and finally understanding which of my children sees me as a person and which one sees me as a bank account." "I see. Well, we'll need to meet in person to make changes of this magnitude. Can you come in tomorrow afternoon? I'll need time to draw up new documents." "I'll be there." That evening, I called Jennifer one more time. I told myself it was to give her one last chance, one final opportunity to show that she cared about more than her legal briefs and client dinners. But deep down, I think I knew what the outcome would be. She answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear the same restaurant noise in the background that seemed to accompany all of our conversations lately. "Dad, hi, how are the surgery preparations going?" "They're going fine, sweetheart. Michael's been helping me get everything organized." "That's good. Michael's always been better at that stuff than me." "Jenny, I was wondering, would you be able to come to the hospital on Friday? Just to be there when I go into surgery?" Another pause, longer than the last one. "Dad, Friday is really bad for me. We're in the middle of settlement negotiations for that big case I told you about, and if we don't get this wrapped up by the end of the week, we could lose the client entirely. I might not make it through the surgery." "Jenny, Dad, don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. Dr. Kumar is one of the best cardiac surgeons in the state, and you're strong for your age. Besides, Michael will be there, and he'll call me if anything important happens." If anything important happens, as if my open heart surgery wasn't already important enough to warrant her presence. I just thought, since it's major surgery, since there are risks, double quotes, "Dad, you're being dramatic. People have bypass surgery every day. It's routine now. You'll be back home complaining about the hospital food before you know it." Routine. My life-threatening surgery was routine, not worthy of her time or attention. "Okay," I said quietly. "I understand." "Good. And Dad, try not to worry so much. Everything's going to be fine. Like I said, just let us know when you're better." There it was again, those same words that had been echoing in my head for days. Let us know when you're better. After I hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the family photos that covered every available surface. Jennifer at her law school graduation, beaming with pride as I stood beside her in my best suit. Jennifer at her wedding, beautiful and radiant, dancing with me to Daddy's Little Girl, while tears streamed down both our faces. Jennifer holding her law degree, pointing at the magna cum laude designation that represented years of hard work and sacrifice, both hers and mine. When had she stopped being that little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories? When had she become someone who could dismiss her father's medical crisis as an inconvenience? The next afternoon, I sat in Robert Hendricks' office signing documents that would fundamentally alter the legacy I'd planned to leave behind. The new will was simple and straightforward. Everything to Michael, nothing to Jennifer. No explanation, no conditions, no opportunity for her to contest the decision based on some claim of mental incompetence or undue influence. "Edward," Robert said as I signed the final page, "I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do? This will undoubtedly cause family conflict after you're gone?" "Robert, the family conflict already exists. I'm just finally acknowledging it. But Jennifer is still your daughter. Perhaps a smaller bequest, maybe 25% instead of 50, might be more appropriate than cutting her out entirely." I thought about that for a moment. A smaller bequest would certainly be less dramatic, less likely to cause the kind of explosive family confrontation that would inevitably follow the reading of this will. It would be a compromise, a way to express my disappointment without completely burning bridges. But then I thought about Jennifer's voice on the phone. "Let us know when you're better." I thought about her priorities, her complete indifference to my medical crisis, her assumption that Michael would handle all the messy, inconvenient aspects of my illness, while she focused on more important things. "No," I said firmly. "If Jennifer wanted to be remembered in my will, she should have remembered that I was her father when I needed her most." I walked out of Robert's office with copies of my new will in a manila envelope, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief that I hadn't expected. Sadness for the relationship I'd lost with my daughter, for the hopes I'd had about our family that would never be realized. Relief that I'd finally stopped pretending that unconditional love required unconditional rewards. That evening, Michael came over to help me pack a bag for the hospital stay. As he folded pajamas and gathered toiletries, I found myself studying his face, looking for any resemblance to the little boy who used to help me wash cars in the driveway and beg me to throw just one more football pass before dinner. "Mike," I said as he zipped up my overnight bag, "I want you to know how much it means to me that you've been here through all of this." "Dad, you don't need to thank me. This is what family does." "No," I said, "this is what you do. This is who you are. But it's not what everyone does. And I don't want you to think it goes unnoticed." Michael looked up from the bag, and I saw something in his expression that told me he understood we were talking about more than just hospital visits and preoperative appointments. "Jennifer's going to regret this someday," he said quietly. "Maybe, but that's her choice to make, just like it was her choice not to be here when I needed her." "Dad, are you sure you don't want me to call her one more time, to let her know how serious Friday really is?" I considered it. I imagined one final phone call where I laid out exactly what was at stake, exactly what she was choosing to miss. But what would be the point? If Jennifer needed me to beg her to care about my welfare, then her presence would be meaningless anyway. "No," I said. "She made her choice. Now, I've made mine." Thursday night, the evening before my surgery, I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me. Every creak and groan was familiar. The soundtrack of a home where I'd spent more than 3 decades building a life with the woman I loved and raising the children who were supposed to carry on our legacy. In 12 hours, surgeons would stop my heart and rebuild the vessels that kept it beating. There was a very real possibility that I would never see this house again. Never sit in my kitchen reading the morning paper. Never tend the garden that my wife had planted and I'd maintained since her death. If I died on that operating table, Michael would inherit everything: the house, the life insurance, the retirement accounts that represented a lifetime of careful saving. He would use that money wisely, I knew, probably to expand his business or ensure his own children had better opportunities than he'd had. And Jennifer would get the phone call she'd been avoiding all week, the one that would let her know I was better in the most final way possible. She would come to my funeral in her expensive suit, probably straight from another client meeting, and she would wonder why her name wasn't mentioned in the will. By then, it would be too late for her to understand what she'd lost. Too late to realize that love, even a father's love, isn't infinite. Too late to learn that relationships require investment from both sides, that you can't take and take and take without eventually finding the well has run dry. As I drifted off to sleep, my last conscious thought was a prayer, not for the surgery, but for my children. I prayed that Michael would find happiness in the legacy I was leaving him, and I prayed that someday, somehow, Jennifer would understand that she had chosen her career over her father, and that choices have consequences that last long after the choosing is done. The call to prep for surgery came at 5:30 a.m., 40 minutes earlier than scheduled. Dr. Kumar's surgical team had experienced a cancellation, and they wanted to move my operation up to give themselves more time in case complications arose. Michael answered the phone and immediately called me back, his voice tense with nervous energy. "Dad, they want us there by 6:15. I'm leaving the house now. I'll pick you up in 10 minutes. I'd been awake since 4 a.m. anyway, staring at the ceiling and running through everything I'd wanted to say to my children but never had. The kind of conversations you imagine having when you realize that time might be running out. The words that seem so important in the dark hours before dawn but somehow never get spoken in the ordinary light of day. The drive to the hospital was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts as the city slowly came to life around us. Michael kept glancing at me from the driver's seat, and I could see the worry etched in the lines around his eyes. He was trying to be strong for me, the same way he'd been trying to be strong throughout this entire ordeal. But the weight of potentially losing his only remaining parent was clearly taking its toll. "Mike," I said as we pulled into the hospital parking garage. I need you to know something, Dad. Save it for after the surgery. You're going to be fine, and we'll have plenty of time to talk during your recovery. I need to say this now, just in case. I turned to face him, this son who had grown into the kind of man any father would be proud to claim. Whatever happens today, I want you to know that you've been everything I could have asked for in a son. Your mother would be so proud of who you've become. Michael's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded and squeezed my hand. I love you too, Dad. The preoperative process was a blur of paperwork, medical questions, and increasingly revealing hospital gowns. They started an IV, took more blood work, and had me sign what felt like dozens of consent forms acknowledging all the ways the surgery could go wrong. Through it all, Michael sat beside me, occasionally cracking jokes to lighten the mood, but mostly just being present in the way that only truly caring people know how to be. At 7:45, 15 minutes before they were scheduled to wheel me into the operating room, my phone rang. Michael and I both looked at the screen, and I felt my heart skip when I saw Jennifer's name. Should I answer it? I asked. It's your call, Dad. I accepted the call, putting it on speaker so Michael could hear. Hello, Jenny and Dad. Hi. I just wanted to call before your surgery to wish you good luck. Good luck. Not I love you or I'm sorry I can't be there or I've been thinking about you all night. Just good luck. Like I was taking a test or interviewing for a job. Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot. I know Michael's there with you, so you're in good hands. And Dad? Try not to worry. Like I said before, this is routine surgery. You'll be back to your normal self before you know it. Routine surgery. Even now, even when they were about to crack open my chest and stop my heart, Jennifer was minimizing the seriousness of what I was facing. Jenny, I said, my voice carefully controlled, this might be the last time we talk. Dad, don't be so dramatic. Dr. Kumar performs these operations all the time. The success rate is like 95% or something. 95%. Which meant there was still a 5% chance that her father would die on the operating table, and she was treating those odds like a weather forecast. But if something does happen, nothing's going to happen. You're going to have this surgery, spend a few days complaining about hospital food, and then Michael will drive you home to recover. In 6 months, you'll be back to working in your garden like nothing ever happened. I looked at Michael, whose jaw was clenched so tight I was worried he might crack a tooth. Even he, who had always made excuses for Jennifer's behavior, could hear the casual indifference in her voice. Okay, I said finally. Well, thank you for calling, of course. Oh, and Dad, I'll probably be pretty busy over the next few days with this case, so don't worry if you don't hear from me right away. Like I keep saying, just let us know when you're better and back on your feet. Let us know when you're better. For the third time in a week, those words that had become the soundtrack to my relationship with my eldest daughter. I'll do that, I said. Great. Love you, Dad. Talk soon. She hung up before I could respond, leaving Michael and me sitting in the preoperative holding area in stunned silence. I could hear the bustle of hospital activity around us, nurses preparing other patients, families saying what might be their final goodbyes, the normal chaos of a cardiac surgery unit on a busy Friday morning. Dad, Michael said quietly, I can't believe she just said that. Said what? That you're being dramatic about major heart surgery? That she's too busy with work to call for the next few days? That she wants you to let her know when you're better instead of asking how she can help you get better? I didn't respond, because there wasn't really anything to say. Jennifer had just proven, one final time, exactly where I stood in her list of priorities. Somewhere below client dinners and settlement negotiations, somewhere in the category of routine maintenance rather than family crisis, Mr. Richardson, a nurse, appeared at my bedside with a wheelchair. We're ready for you now. The trip to the operating room was surreal, like something out of a movie. Bright fluorescent lights flashing overhead, the squeaking of wheelchair wheels on linoleum, Michael walking beside me holding my hand. We stopped outside the OR doors, the place where family members weren't allowed to go, where I would have to face whatever came next on my own. I'll be right here when you wake up, Michael promised, leaning down to hug me. I'm not going anywhere. I know you won't, I said. You never do. The anesthesiologist was a cheerful woman named Dr. Park, who explained that I'd feel drowsy within a few seconds of the medication entering my F. As she prepared the syringe, I found myself thinking about the manila envelope sitting in my safe at home. The new will that would shock Jennifer whenever she finally got around to learning about its contents. Count backward from 10 for me, Dr. Park said, as she pushed the medication into my foreline. 10, I said, thinking about Jennifer's voice. Let us know when you're better. 9, I said, thinking about Michael's sacrifice, his unwavering presence throughout the past week. 8, I said, thinking about the choice I had made, the legacy I was leaving behind. 7, I said, and then everything went dark. I woke up what felt like minutes later, but was actually 6 hours later, in the cardiac intensive care unit with more tubes and wires attached to me than I'd known it was possible to survive. Everything hurt: my chest, my throat, my arms, even my back from lying on the operating table for so long. But I was alive, and according to the monitors beeping around me, my rebuilt heart was beating steadily. Michael was asleep in a chair beside my bed, still wearing the same clothes he'd had on that morning. His hair mussed and his face creased with exhaustion. When I moved slightly, trying to get more comfortable, he woke up immediately. Dad, how are you feeling? I tried to speak, but the breathing tube they'd removed during surgery had left my throat raw and painful. Instead, I squeezed his hand, which seemed to be answer enough. The surgery went perfectly, Michael said, his voice thick with relief and exhaustion. Dr. Kumar said it couldn't have gone better. Triple bypass. All the blockages cleared. Your heart is pumping better than it has in years. You're going to be fine, Dad. You're going to be completely fine. Over the next few hours, as the anesthesia wore off and the pain medication helped me find some comfort, Michael filled me in on the details of my surgery. How Dr. Kumar had found more blockages than expected, but had been able to clear them all. How the surgical team had been impressed with the strength of my heart muscle despite the damage from years of restricted blood flow. How the recovery was expected to be textbook, with me going home within a week and back to normal activities within 2 months. Has Jennifer called? I asked when my voice finally worked well enough for conversation. Michael's expression darkened. She texted me around lunchtime asking for an update. I told her the surgery went well and you were in recovery. She texted back, "Great, thanks for letting me know," and that was it. "Great, thanks for letting me know." Like Michael had been giving her a weather report rather than an update on her father's major surgery. Did you tell her I was awake? No, Dad. Honestly, I'm not sure she deserves to know until you decide you want to talk to her. I thought about that as I drifted in and out of sleep over the next day and a half. Jennifer had made her choice. She'd chosen her work over her family, her career over her father, her own convenience over the most serious medical crisis of my life. She'd had multiple opportunities to show up, to be present, to demonstrate that our relationship mattered to her, and she'd declined every one of them. On Sunday afternoon, 48 hours after my surgery, I was transferred from the ICU to a regular room. Michael had barely left my side except to go home and shower, and even then he'd arranged for his wife Sarah to sit with me so I wouldn't be alone. That's when Jennifer finally showed up. She arrived during visiting hours, carrying a small bouquet of flowers from the hospital gift shop and wearing what looked like workout clothes, yoga pants and a zip-up hoodie that suggested she'd made a minimal effort to look presentable for the visit. "Dad, oh my God, you look terrible," were the first words out of her mouth as she walked into my room. "Hello to you too, Jenny," I said, my voice still hoarse from the breathing tube. I mean, I knew surgery was serious, but seeing you like this, it's kind of shocking. Michael, who had been reading in the chair beside my bed, looked up from his book with barely concealed irritation. He looks like someone who just had his chest cracked open and his heart rebuilt. "Jennifer, what did you expect?" "I don't know. I guess I thought he'd look more normal by now. More normal. 3 days after triple bypass surgery, I was supposed to look normal. How was your case?" I asked. "The one that was so important you couldn't be here for the surgery." Jennifer brightened immediately, apparently missing the edge in my voice entirely. "Oh, it went amazing. We settled for $12 million, which is the biggest settlement our firm has ever negotiated. I'm probably going to make partner because of this case." "Congratulations," I said flatly. "Thanks. I mean, it was touch and go for a while. We were in negotiations until almost midnight on Friday, then back at it Saturday morning, but it was totally worth it. This case is going to change everything for me." Friday, midnight. While I was coming out of anesthesia in the ICU, Jennifer was celebrating her legal victory. While Michael was spending his second sleepless night in a hospital chair, Jennifer was toasting her career advancement. "I'm glad everything worked out for you," I said. "Yeah, me too. And you're obviously fine." So everything worked out for everyone. Obviously fine. I was obviously fine because I had survived the surgery, never mind the pain, the weeks of recovery ahead, the fundamental changes to my health and lifestyle that would follow me for the rest of my life. Jennifer stayed for exactly 20 minutes, spending most of that time talking about her legal victory and her upcoming promotion. She asked perfunctory questions about my recovery timeline and made vague promises about visiting again soon. Then she kissed my forehead, told me to get better quickly, and left. After she was gone, Michael and I sat in silence for a long time. I could see him struggling with his anger, trying to find a way to express his frustration with his sister without upsetting me while I was still recovering. "Dad," he said finally, "I know Jennifer is your daughter, and I know you love her, but what just happened was not okay. She spent 20 minutes here, most of it talking about herself, and left like she was checking an item off her to-do list." "I know," I said quietly. "She doesn't even realize how serious this was. She doesn't understand that you could have died, that you're going to need months to fully recover, that this changes everything about your health going forward." "I know, and she's not going to change. Dad, this is who she is now. She's not going to suddenly become the daughter you raised, the one who used to care about more than just her career." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of that truth settling over me like a blanket. Jennifer was gone, not physically but emotionally, spiritually, in all the ways that really mattered. The little girl who used to climb into my lap was now a stranger who saw my medical crisis as a minor inconvenience in her professional schedule. "The will," I said. I'm not changing it back. Michael nodded slowly. I didn't think you would. That night, alone in my hospital room while Michael went home to spend some time with his own family, I stared out the window at the city lights and thought about the legacy I was leaving behind. Not just the money and property, but the message that love has to be mutual to be meaningful. That relationships require investment from both sides. That you can't take someone's devotion for granted indefinitely without eventually losing it. Jennifer would learn about the will someday, probably after my funeral when the lawyer read it aloud to the assembled family. She would be shocked, angry, possibly devastated to learn that her inheritance had disappeared because of choices she didn't even realize she was making. But by then it would be too late for apologies or explanations. By then the only conversation that mattered would be the one between Jennifer and her own conscience. The one where she would have to confront the truth about what kind of daughter she had been and what kind of person she had become. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, thinking about Michael's steady presence throughout the worst week of my life, and Jennifer's voice echoing through my memory, "Let us know when you're better." Soon enough, she would know exactly how much better I was, and she would finally understand what it cost her to treat her father's love as something that would always be there, no matter how little she valued it in return. 2 years passed before the phone call came. 2 years of steady recovery, of gradually rebuilding my strength and learning to live with the limitations that came with my rebuilt heart. 2 years of weekly dinners at Michael's house, of watching his children grow, of being the grandfather I'd always hoped to be. 2 years of Jennifer's sporadic phone calls, usually when she needed something, occasionally when guilt or social obligation reminded her to check in on her aging father. The pattern had become predictable. Jennifer would call every few months, ask perfunctory questions about my health, spend most of the conversation talking about her legal cases or her social life, then end with some variation of, "We should get together soon," a promise that was never kept. Michael, meanwhile, had become not just my son but my closest friend. He included me in family vacations, sought my advice on business decisions, and made sure I never felt forgotten or alone. His children knew me as the grandfather who taught them to fish and helped with homework and never missed a soccer game or school play. I was content with this arrangement. My recovery had been complete. My health better than it had been in years, thanks to the lifestyle changes that followed my surgery. I'd learned to appreciate the relationships that truly mattered, while letting go of the ones that had been based on obligation rather than genuine affection. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March while I was reading the newspaper at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd been sitting when the chest pains started 2 years earlier. But this time, it wasn't my heart that stopped when I saw the caller ID. "Mr. Richardson, this is Dr. Patricia Walsh from Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter, Jennifer Richardson Walsh." My blood went cold. "What's happened?" "She's been in a serious car accident, Mr. Richardson. She was brought in about 2 hours ago with significant injuries. You're listed as her emergency contact, and we need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible." The irony wasn't lost on me as I called Michael, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. 2 years ago, when I'd been the one facing a medical crisis, Jennifer had been too busy to interrupt her work schedule. Now she was the one fighting for her life, and she'd apparently never bothered to update her emergency contacts to reflect the reality of our relationship. Michael arrived at my house within 10 minutes, his face grim with concern despite the complicated dynamics involved. "What did the doctor say about her condition?" "Serious injuries?" But she didn't give me details over the phone. "They want us there immediately." The drive to the hospital was silent, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what we might find when we arrived. Whatever Jennifer's faults as a daughter, she was still family. Still someone who had once been the most important person in my world. Dr. Walsh met us in the waiting area of the trauma unit, her expression carefully professional, but tinged with the kind of gravity that immediately tells you the situation is dire. "Mr. Richardson, I'm Dr. Walsh. Thank you for coming so quickly. How is she?" "Your daughter has sustained severe internal injuries from the accident. We've stabilized her for now, but the next 24 hours will be critical. She has a ruptured spleen, significant liver damage, and some concerning neurological symptoms that we're still evaluating." The medical terminology washed over me, but the underlying message was clear. Jennifer might not survive this. "Can we see her?" Michael asked. "She's in the ICU, sedated and on life support. Family members can visit, but only for brief periods, and only 2 at a time." As we walked through the corridors toward the ICU, I found myself thinking about the last conversation Jennifer and I had shared. It had been 3 weeks ago, a phone call that lasted less than 10 minutes, where she'd told me about a vacation she was planning to Europe and asked if I was still doing okay after my surgery. She'd sounded distracted throughout the call, probably checking emails while we talked. Now she was lying in a hospital bed, unconscious and fighting for her life. And I was the person the hospital had called because I was the only family member she'd thought to list on her medical forms. The ICU was exactly as I remembered it from my own stay 2 years earlier, the constant beeping of monitors, the antiseptic smell, the hushed conversations of medical staff moving between patients who balanced on the edge between life and death. Jennifer looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her face pale and swollen from the accident, tubes and wires covering her body just as they had covered mine during my recovery. But there was something different about seeing your child in that condition, something that cuts deeper than your own mortality ever could. Oh, Jenny, I whispered, reaching out to touch her hand. For the next 3 days, Michael and I took shifts, sitting by Jennifer's bedside. The doctors had induced a medical coma to give her brain time to heal from the trauma. So there was nothing to do but wait and watch the monitors and hope that her body would find the strength to repair itself. On the second day, Jennifer's assistant called the hospital looking for her. Apparently, she'd missed a crucial client meeting, and nobody at her law firm had known where she was. When I explained the situation, the assistant, a young woman named Amanda who seemed genuinely concerned, broke down crying. "Mr. Richardson, I'm so sorry. Jennifer talks about you all the time. She's always saying how proud she is of how well you've recovered from your surgery, how strong you are, how much she admires your resilience." I was stunned. "She talks about me, all the time. She keeps a picture of you and your son on her desk, and whenever clients comment on it, she tells them about how you taught her the importance of hard work and determination. She says you're the strongest person she knows." Amanda's words didn't align with the Jennifer I'd experienced over the past few years, the daughter who treated my medical crisis as an inconvenience, who rarely called and never visited unless she needed something. But maybe that was because I'd only seen one side of her relationship with our family, the side that involved actual interaction rather than private reflection. "Amanda," I said carefully, "did Jennifer ever mention why she doesn't visit more often?" "Actually, yes. She said she feels terrible about not being there for your surgery, and that she's been trying to figure out how to make it up to you ever since. She said she was ashamed of how she handled everything when you were sick, but she didn't know how to bring it up without making things worse." Ashamed? Jennifer had been carrying guilt about her behavior during my surgery, but instead of addressing it directly, she'd pulled back even further from our relationship. "She also said," Amanda continued, "that she was planning to surprise you for your 75th birthday next month. She'd been working with your son to organize a big party. Something about bringing together all your old friends and coworkers to celebrate your recovery." I looked at Michael, who was standing beside me in the hospital hallway. "Did you know about this?" "She called me about 6 weeks ago," Michael admitted. "She wanted to plan something special, said she'd been feeling guilty about not being more involved in your recovery. I didn't mention it because I wanted to see if she'd actually follow through this time. 6 weeks ago, right around the time of our last phone call, when she'd sounded distracted and distant, she hadn't been checking emails during our conversation. She'd been making notes about my birthday party. Over the next day, as we continued our vigil by Jennifer's bedside, more pieces of information emerged that painted a different picture of my daughter than the one I'd been carrying for 2 years. Her colleagues from the law firm stopped by to check on her, and they all mentioned how often Jennifer talked about her family, how proud she was of Michael's business success, how worried she'd been about my health. "She keeps your surgery photos on her phone," one of her law partners told me. "The ones your son took of you in the hospital. She shows them to everyone, talks about what a fighter you are, how you bounced back from major surgery like it was nothing." Surgery photos. I remembered Michael taking a few pictures during my recovery, mostly to document my progress for the doctors. I'd had no idea Jennifer had copies of them, let alone that she carried them with her. "She also mentioned," the partner continued, "that she'd been saving up to take you and your son on that European vacation she talked about. Something about wanting to give back to the family that had given her so much." European vacation. I'd thought Jennifer was telling me about her own travel plans, but she'd been planning a family trip. On the 4th day, Dr. Walsh made the decision to start reducing Jennifer's sedation, hoping her body was ready to begin waking up on its own. Michael and I sat on either side of her bed, watching for any signs of consciousness, any indication that she was fighting her way back to us. It was just after 3 p.m. when Jennifer's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused but unmistakably aware. She tried to speak around the breathing tube, and Dr. Walsh quickly called for the respiratory therapist to begin the process of removing it. "Jennifer," I said softly, squeezing her hand. "Jenny, it's Dad. You're in the hospital. But you're going to be okay." Her eyes found my face, and I saw recognition there, followed immediately by something that looked like panic. Not panic about her injuries or her condition, but panic about something else entirely. Once the breathing tube was removed and she could speak, the first words out of Jennifer's mouth were, "Dad, I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what, sweetheart? You didn't do anything wrong." "About your surgery," she said, her voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "About not being there. About being such a terrible daughter. I've wanted to apologize for 2 years, but I didn't know how to face what I'd done." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Jenny, you don't need to apologize. You were dealing with your own life, your own responsibilities." "No," she said firmly, gripping my hand with more strength than I'd thought she possessed. "There's no excuse for what I did. You needed me, and I wasn't there. I chose work over family, and I've regretted it every single day since. But Amanda said you were proud of my recovery, that you talked about me at work. Of course I'm proud of you. Dad, you're the strongest person I know, but being proud of you doesn't excuse the fact that I abandoned you when you needed me most." Michael leaned forward from his chair on the other side of the bed. "Jennifer, Why didn't you just tell us how you felt? Why did you pull away instead of trying to make things right? Because I was ashamed, Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. Because every time I thought about calling or visiting, I remembered how I failed when it really mattered. I thought Dad would never forgive me, that I'd damaged our relationship beyond repair. I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd thought had become cold and indifferent, and realized I'd been wrong about everything. Jennifer hadn't stopped caring about our family. She'd been drowning in guilt and shame about her failure to show up during my crisis. Instead of addressing it directly, she'd retreated into her work and convinced herself that staying away was better than facing the disappointment she'd caused. Jenny, I said, my voice breaking, I already forgave you. I forgave you the day you called before my surgery, even though you couldn't be there. I forgave you when you visited afterward, even though it wasn't the visit I'd hoped for. Love doesn't stop because someone makes a mistake, even a big one. But I hurt you, she whispered. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. Yes, you hurt me, but you're my daughter, and that matters more than any mistake you could ever make. We talked for hours over the next few days as Jennifer's condition stabilized, and she began the long process of physical recovery. She told me about the guilt that had been eating at her for 2 years, about how she'd been too ashamed to reach out but too proud to admit her shame. She told me about the birthday party she'd been planning, about the vacation she'd wanted to take us on, about all the ways she'd been trying to figure out how to repair the damage she'd done to our relationship. I kept thinking I needed to do something big, she said, something that would prove how sorry I was, how much I loved you. But every time I tried to plan something, I'd remember how I failed during your surgery, and I'd convince myself that nothing I could do would ever be enough. Jenny, all I ever wanted was for you to show up. Not with grand gestures or expensive trips, just show up, be present, be my daughter. Can I still be your daughter? She asked, her voice small and uncertain, even after everything I did wrong. I thought about the manila envelope sitting in my safe at home, about the will that had cut her out of my legacy entirely. For 2 years, I'd been convinced that Jennifer had chosen her career over her family, that she'd become someone who saw me as an obligation rather than a person she loved. But sitting in that hospital room, seeing the genuine anguish in her eyes, hearing about the guilt she'd been carrying all this time, I realized that my daughter hadn't stopped loving me. She'd just gotten lost in her own shame and hadn't known how to find her way back. Of course, you can still be my daughter, I said. You never stopped being my daughter, even when I thought you had. Jennifer's recovery took 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which she and I had more honest conversations than we'd shared in the previous 5 years combined. She told me about the pressure she felt to be successful, about how her drive to excel had cost her relationships and peace of mind. I told her about my disappointment during my surgery, about how her absence had felt like abandonment even though I'd tried to rationalize it away. Most importantly, we both acknowledged that we'd been making assumptions about each other instead of having direct conversations about our feelings and expectations. I thought you didn't care, I admitted. I thought your work was more important to you than our family, and I thought you'd given up on me, Jennifer said. I thought I'd disappointed you so badly that you'd written me off as a lost cause. We both thought wrong, Michael observed from his chair beside Jennifer's hospital bed, where he'd been a constant presence throughout her recovery, and we almost lost each other because of it. On the day Jennifer was discharged from the hospital, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. I called Robert Hendricks and asked him to draw up a new will, one that restored the original 50-50 split between my children. Jennifer had made a mistake, a serious one that had caused real pain and damaged our relationship. But she'd also recognized that mistake, taken responsibility for it, and was actively working to repair the damage she'd caused. That kind of growth, that kind of commitment to doing better, deserved to be acknowledged and rewarded. Are you sure about this, Edward? Robert asked when I explained what I wanted to do. Just a few weeks ago, you were convinced that Jennifer didn't deserve to inherit anything. A few weeks ago, I thought Jennifer didn't care about me. I replied, I was wrong about that, and I was wrong about what she deserved. She made a bad choice during a difficult time, but she's spending the rest of her time trying to make up for it. That's the kind of person I want to leave my legacy to. 6 months later, we did take that European vacation Jennifer had been planning, all 3 of us, along with Michael's family, on a 2-week trip that was part celebration of Jennifer's recovery and part celebration of our family's reconciliation. Standing in a cafe in Paris, watching Jennifer play with Michael's children while she explained French architecture in the patient, enthusiastic way that reminded me of the little girl she'd once been, I realized something important. Love isn't about keeping score of mistakes and victories. It's about showing up, again and again, even when it's hard. It's about forgiveness, growth, and the willingness to keep trying to do better. Jennifer had failed to show up when I needed her most, but she'd spent 2 years learning from that failure and figuring out how to be the daughter she wanted to be. That journey from failure to recognition to repair was perhaps more valuable than if she'd gotten it right the first time. Dad, Jennifer said that evening as we walked along the Seine River, I want you to know that I'll never take our relationship for granted again. I'll never assume that your love will be there no matter how I treat it. Good, I said. because it will be there, but it deserves to be treated with care. I know that now. I learned it the hard way, but I learned it. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, father and daughter, both of us grateful for the second chance we'd been given to get this right. Jenny, I said as we turned back toward our hotel, the next time I need you, will you be there? Dad, she said, linking her arm through mine, the next time you need me, you won't even have to ask. I'll already be there, and I believed her. Because sometimes the most important lessons come from our failures, and sometimes the strongest relationships are the ones that have been broken and carefully rebuilt. Jennifer had learned that love requires presence, not just promises. I had learned that forgiveness requires understanding the whole story, not just the parts that hurt. And we had both learned that family isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to do the work of loving each other, especially when that work is hard. The end.
My parents let my sister sell my dream car.